Few fates are more terrifying than remaining conscious while one's own body rots away. For most victims of gangrene, death comes swiftly. Shock overwhelms the system, or the brain slips mercifully into coma before the worst unfolds. But in the summer of 1715, Louis XIV of France, the most powerful monarch in Europe, endured something different. For 22 days, he watched his body betray him piece by piece. He could see his own flesh blacken, liquefy, and fall apart. He could smell his own rot filling the golden halls of Versailles. And worst of all, his mind remained cruelly intact almost to the very end. This was not some obscure peasant forgotten in a village grave. This was the Sun King, who had ruled for 72 years, built Versailles into the greatest palace of Europe, commanded armies and reshaped the continent, a man who believed he reigned by divine right, God's anointed on earth. Yet when a black spot appeared on his leg after a routine hunting trip, none of that mattered. The story of Louis XIV's final illness is more than medical tragedy. It is the collapse of a political theater that had kept France enthralled for decades. His death stripped away the layers of myth and revealed a truth. Versailles could not hide. Beneath the gold, beneath the crowns, even a king rots like any other man. Louis XIV's reign was one of spectacle. From the moment he ascended the throne as a child in 1643, he cultivated the image of himself as the Sun King, the center of political gravity, radiating order and magnificence. Versailles, with its 700 rooms, gardens stretching for miles and mirrored halls, was not just a residence, it was propaganda in stone. Every ritual, every feast, every glance of the king's eye reinforced the idea that he was semi-divine, that to serve him was to touch eternity. But this theater required perfection. Louis had to be untiring, unbending, a living monument. Weakness was not permitted, and so when age caught up to him, when his body began to fail, he resisted with the same determination he once brought to war. In 1715, at the age of 76, he was still riding for hours on hunts, attending endless ceremonies, and enduring the suffocating etiquette of Versailles. It was an old man playing the part of an immortal god. That illusion would shatter on August 10, 1715. That morning, Louis rode out at Marly, his beloved hunting retreat, 6 hours in the saddle, through forests he had known since boyhood. He returned in good spirits, but during the ride home, he felt a sharp pain in his left leg. By the time he reached Versailles, he was limping. His chief physician, Guy Crescent Fagan, dismissed it as sciatica. Rest, some poultices, a little laudanum, and the king would be fine. It was a fatal misjudgment. What looked like a bruise soon revealed itself as something far worse. A blackened patch of skin, coin-sized, just above the knee. It was the first outward sign of senile gangrene. Today we know gangrene arises when circulation fails. In Louis's case, decades of feasting, obesity, and likely diabetes had destroyed the arteries feeding his legs. With no blood supply, tissue simply died. But 18th century medicine still spoke of humors. They had no concept of bacteria or vascular disease. To them, the black spot was a curiosity, not a death sentence. Louis, meanwhile, would not rest. His dignity depended on routine. The lever ceremony at 8:30, chapel, councils, meals eaten under the gaze of courtiers. For a king who believed l'état, c'est moi, I am the state, to show weakness was unthinkable. And so, while infection advanced silently beneath his skin, Louis pressed on. By August 13th, the pain had grown unbearable. Witnesses described him gripping his chair until his knuckles whitened, sweat dripping during council meetings. His appetite, usually legendary, evaporated. At dinner, he pushed away food after a few bites. Madame de Maintenon, his secret wife, saw it and feared the worst. The leg worsened, swelling, discoloration. A spreading bruise that turned purple, then black. The smell began, sickly sweet, the unmistakable scent of rotting flesh. By August 15th, when Louis forced himself to attend Mass on the Feast of the Assumption, courtiers discreetly pressed perfumed handkerchiefs to their noses. The Sun King was already rotting, and the odor of it filled his chapel. By August 17th, other physicians had been summoned. They examined the leg, now grotesquely swollen, skin cracking and oozing fluid. They muttered about mortification and putrefaction. Their remedies? Donkey milk baths, camphorated spirits, bloodletting, treatments that not only failed but drained the king's already weakened body. Meanwhile, politics sharpened outside the chamber. Louis's death would leave the throne to his 5-year-old great-grandson, the future Louis XV. Factions immediately formed. Philippe d'Orléans, the king's nephew, maneuvered to secure the regency. The legitimized Duke of Maine tried to rally support. Versailles became a nest of vultures, waiting for the moment when the monarch's last breath would release the crown. The king himself, however, was not yet ready to yield. August 25th, St. Louis's Day, the feast of the king's namesake. For decades, Louis had marked it with special ceremony. This year, despite his condition, he insisted on appearing. The attempt ended in horror. When his valet tried to pull silk stockings over his swollen leg, the skin tore away. Blackened flesh stuck to the fabric. Louis screamed, a sound few had ever heard from him in public. The courtiers recoiled as the chamber filled with the stench of decay. That day, the king was carried back to bed and would never rise again. From August 25th onward, the deterioration was shocking. The entire left leg, from foot to thigh, turned black and green. Surgeons probing it reported that flesh gave way like cheese under their fingers. The smell was so overpowering that fires of incense had to burn constantly, creating a nauseating blend of perfume and rot. And yet Louis's mind remained clear. He continued to conduct state business from his bed, signing documents, dictating orders, even receiving ambassadors. Imagine it, the most powerful man in Europe, issuing decrees while his leg liquefied beneath silk sheets. On August 26th, Louis summoned the child who would succeed him. His 5-year-old great-grandson entered the chamber. Confronted by the stench and the sight of a rotting monarch, Louis pulled the boy close and gave him advice that still echoes through history. Do not imitate me in my love of war, nor in my spending. Relieve your people's burdens. It was a confession, an acknowledgement of his failures. For a ruler who had waged wars for over 5 decades, who had drained France's treasury and starved its people for Versailles' splendor, these words were extraordinary. They revealed a king who, as death approached, understood the ruin he had wrought. The following days blurred into agony. Fever consumed him. At one point, a charlatan healer promised a miracle elixir. For a brief moment, Louis revived, asking for food, his courtiers whispering of recovery. By evening, the fever returned worse than ever. Hope died with it. On August 31st, Louis ordered his curtains drawn back so all might see him. "Look well," he told the assembled courtiers. "This is what becomes of the glory of kings." It was his final act of theater, revealing not splendor but decay. The next morning, September 1st, 1715, at 8:15, the Sun King's breathing slowed, stopped, and was declared ended. The longest reign in European history was over. Chaos erupted instantly. Philippe d'Orléans hurried to secure his regency. Rivals were shoved aside. Courtiers scrambled to survive the new order. Meanwhile, the king's body lay abandoned in the Mercury room. The embalmers who arrived recoiled. The corpse was already falling apart. His legs, liquefied, collapsed when moved. The embalming process was nightmarish, and rumors spread that his remains had to be poured into the coffin. Tradition demanded that body, heart, and entrails be separated for burial at different churches. But even these rituals faltered. The decay was too advanced. When the funeral procession finally took place, some along the route jeered. France, exhausted by war and taxes, had grown weary of the Sun King's glory. At the funeral oration, Bishop Massillon opened with words that cut deeper than any epitaph: "God alone is great. Not Louis the Great, not the Sun King, just God." In a single phrase, the illusion of divine monarchy collapsed. Louis XIV's death was more than the end of a king. It was the end of an idea, that monarchy could be divine, eternal, untouchable. For 72 years, Louis had embodied the theater of absolutism. Yet in death, he proved as fragile as any peasant. Versailles, once a temple of splendor, became an empty tomb. His great-grandson would inherit an exhausted kingdom, crushed by debt. Within 2 generations, the Bourbon monarchy would collapse entirely in revolution. When revolutionaries exhumed Louis's coffin in 1793, they melted the lead for bullets, tossed the bones into common pits, and covered them with lime. The man who once declared, "I am the state," ended as nothing more than fragments dissolved in the soil. Louis XIV's last 22 days revealed a truth Versailles could never mask. Kings die like men. No gold, no army, no divine claim can halt infection or stop the march of decay. The Sun King believed he was immortal in glory. Instead, he died rotting from the feet upward, conscious of every moment. And perhaps that is why his death lingers as one of history's most haunting spectacles. It was not merely the physical horror of gangrene. It was the collapse of illusion. In those final days, Louis XIV discovered what every ruler, every empire eventually must beneath the crown. There is only flesh, and flesh always fails. The sun set, and in the darkness that followed, France began its long stumble toward revolution.